Hi, so today we're going to look at a big band jazz arrangement. It's a Latin jazz, so there's lots of percussion, and in Latin jazz that percussion is the bedrock of the rhythmic groove, the rhythmic element that all the music sits on. So it's essential that you can hear all the rhythmic elements, and it's quite a complex mixture of different rhythmic elements playing with each other that everything else sits on. So you need to be able to hear that really clearly. And this is a track and a recording where I was not hearing that when I turned those instruments up to a good level, because some elements of the rhythmic content of those instruments is just not cutting through. So on their own, if you solo the percussion, sounded fine. But in the context of all those horns, drums, bass, and piano, just the bits that were poking through were just not the right bits to get that groove happening. So I really needed to bring out the right rhythmic elements, and that meant doing some mixing work and some processing. And so we're going to have a look at that, and I hope you're going to find it useful and interesting. But before we get started, if you can like the video, subscribe, ring the bell, that is really helpful to me and really appreciated. And so now let's have a look. So we're going to have a look at percussion and what I did to make it work in this very dense mix, which is a big band Latin jazz tune. And the problem I was having was, as you'll hear, the percussion was not cutting through. And in this kind of music, the percussion really needs to be the bedrock of the rhythm. It's what everything sits on. So you really need to be able to hear all the different percussion instruments well. And I wasn't finding that was working the way they were recorded. So we're going to see what I did to make that work better. So let's start by listening with no percussion, just so you can hear what it's like without the percussion. And then I'm going to bring in the percussion without any processing, as it was dry, but with the panning that I ended up with. And then I'm going to bring in the processing, and you can hear the difference. So we'll start with nothing. So now I'm going to bring in the percussion, and this is just as it was dry. And then I'll switch over to the percussion with effects. So you can hear a big difference. Rhythmically, which is the important thing here, it's really happening with the mixed percussion, and it really wasn't happening without the mixed percussion. And that's because there are certain elements, like the guiro, for example, that really need to sit there as the kind of bedrock of the rhythm and really drive it. So what I've done is not so much turn things up and down, because believe it or not, the volumes are roughly about the same between the two, but they don't cut through. So this is largely what I was doing, is getting these instruments to cut through without having to turn them up. So let's just now have a listen to each of the percussion instruments on its own. So you can see what I started with. In fact, I'm just going to play the percussion on its own, so you can just hear it on its own with no music. So you can hear what we got. And now I'm going to go through individually and have a listen. And one of the great things about Cubase is, which I'm using here, is that it gives you this double solo. So I've got all these soloed, and so I don't hear the rest of the music, but within that solo I can secondarily solo. So if we just want to hear the guiro on its own, I can do that, but I don't lose all my other soloing when I turn that off. Really great. So let's have a listen to that, and let's listen to that without any effects on it and see what we started with. And now with the effects on. So what did I do and why? So I started with feeling that there was a tone thing missing there. So if I turn this off, you hear what I mean. I'm going to turn this off and on. So what this is doing is it's boosting here at 500-600 hertz, and it's also adding saturation there, which thickens and brings out the tone. And I'm just going to turn this off and on so you can hear what it does. So I'll start with it off, then I'll bring it in. So it's really bringing out that, you know, without it, you're just hearing the kind of high end, the way it was recorded, of the stick scraping. And the rhythm isn't just in the high end scratchy part, it's also in the lower part of that stick dragging across the lower part of the sound. And so this is bringing that out. So you get more rhythm because you get both parts, the higher and the lower aspects of the rhythm more, and you get that groove comes out more. That's what I was after with that. Especially in the mix, because without that you just hear the higher part and you kind of miss part of the rhythm. So the next thing I did was I felt it needed a little bit more, it needed a bit of compression, it needed to be held together a bit more flattened, not flattened out so much as the detailed parts brought up more and sitting a little more solidly in what was a very dense mix. Now again, if you didn't have such a dense mix, you probably wouldn't compress something like this, but in something this dense, even if you do that, it kind of gets a bit lost, it comes and goes a bit, and again only certain aspects cut through and the other bits which are key to the rhythm don't come through as well. So again, I'm going to bring this in and out, start with it out and then bring it in. So again, you can hear much more of the groove coming through. And that's also partly because of how I set the timings on this. It's a two-stage compressor with an optical thing which just kind of smooths things out and rides it a little bit, and then a VCA after that where you can get more precise, and that's where I managed to kind of bring out that rhythmic thing a bit more with that two-stage compression. So that's the guiro. Now let's move on to the bells. So these are the bells on their own. Now we'll take the effects out. And again, you can hear the problem there is that wood block sound is way too loud, and it's one microphone. So you know, it was too loud against the bell part, and so in the mix you were just hearing that woodblock part and not really hearing the bells. So I needed to deal with that. So first thing I did again was I compressed it, and again I used the Shadow Hills, and you can hear this before and after. So I'll start with it out. So you can really hear how it brings the attack of the bells out a lot more. And again, that was a matter of setting it up just right, getting the timing right and the amount of compression right so that happened. But I found that this two-stage compression really worked well for this, which is why I chose this one. So the next thing I felt was necessary was to pull back on the mids here. So that's what I'm doing here, and also on the highs. I felt it was a little bit too much high-end stuff going on that I didn't really need, and it was just I didn't feel, it's not that it was horrible sounding, but I didn't feel it was necessary in the mix, and it was almost a kind of adding some high-end stuff there that I didn't necessarily want. So I'm going to bring this in and out, start with it out. So you can hear I'm pulling out some of that really high end there, which to me was just a little bit of a distraction in the mix. And then here I'm pulling out that, again, a little bit more of there was kind of a ringing tone going on there that was dominating a little bit, and the rhythm was not, again, in the density of the mix. And I'm doing all of this in the context of the mix. So I'm jumping between soloing and hearing it in the mix. I was finding that it was just kind of clouding things up a bit. You weren't hearing that. It was just, you know, making it harder to hear everything. So that's the bells and clav, and now let's move over to the conga. Okay, so let's hear this one. So you've got kind of that slappy, rhythmic hands hitting the skin, and you've got that lower tone as well. So now let's hear this without any of the effects in. Now the problem there immediately is that low sound, the low ringing of the drum, was way too loud in comparison with the contact slapping part of the drum. And that's the part you need to hear, because that's where the rhythm is equally as important as the low part. And the low part was cutting through the mix quite audibly, but I was not hearing the, you know, the slapping of the higher end slapping of the skins. And so really needed to even those two out. Again, one mic, so you've got to work with what you've got there. So I started with, again, compression. And again, back to the Shadow Hills here, because it just really works well on percussion, as with lots of things. So I'm going to take this in and out and hear what it's like without it. So it's really bringing out that contact of the hands slapping on the skin. It does actually bring out the ringing as well, but it also brings out the tone of the ringing, but it holds them more evenly in volume at the same time. So that's what that's doing. And then next we have a bit of EQ, and here boosting around about 3K, again to bring out that slappy skin sound. Let's have a listen to that. Out and then in. So you can hear how it really brings out the slap of the skin. I've got it around 3K here, boosted about 4 dB, that's quite a bit. And kind of medium Q here. So this EQ just has a really nice lush sound about it. And I wanted that kind of lush top end. Now if you hear this on its own, it sounds like too much high end, but or too much of an emphasis on those hits, but in the mix it was necessary to get it to cut through. Otherwise they get lost, you just don't hear them. And by the time you've turned it enough to hear them, you hear all those resonating tones too much, and it just it doesn't work. So finally, again, to deal with the resonating tones a bit, I cut back here. So again, I bring this in and out. So again, you can hear that tone, and that was dominating too much in the mix. So that just needed to come down. And with this EQ, you can control the shape really well. And I found that this particular shape of the bell just really worked nicely and transparently with that. Okay, so now moving over to the last of the percussion instruments, we've got a low conga. Now this was the most problematic one. And here, I'm going to play this on its own. So you can hear it just hits occasionally. And I actually have a gate in here because it was picking up the other conga really loudly. And it just wasn't helping. By the time I got this sounding the way it needed to, it was interfering with the other conga, I felt, so I needed to pull that out. So on its own it sounds a little weird because you can hear the gate working. But if you could ignore that for a moment, I'm going to now take out the other two effects so you can hear what it sounds like with just the gate. So like really boomy, and that's what I was getting in the mix, was just this real boom. You weren't really hearing it as a rhythmic thing, you were just hearing a kind of boomy sound. So the first thing I did with this was to find that resonant frequency and pull it down, and also to pull down some of the low end that I didn't feel was helping. So I'm going to bring this in and out, start with it out. So you can hear, you're still hearing the tone, but it's not booming. Now that it might sound like I've pulled it back too much, but the next thing we have here is a compressor, which will bring that back out again in a different way. So this is the arouser, which is the distressor made by Empirical Labs, make both the hardware and the software. So we're going to have a listen to this out and then in. So it's bringing out the attack significantly, so you can hear that. Again, you can start to hear the hand hitting on the skin, which you just couldn't hear, but it was just a boom. So finally, it was reverb, and let's play this without the reverb and then with. So obviously it takes it back, which is what you want. Otherwise it's like right up in your face, and it needs a room. It needs to be in a room somewhere. For that I use the Neoverb, which, I mean, I've got a lot of nice reverbs. This is a nice sounding reverb, but what's good about this one in a very dense mix like this is it's good at getting out of the way. It's got a kind of a thing that listens and sets up pre and post EQ to help it be less get in the way of things. And it's just a really nice, clean, clear sounding reverb based on the, I believe based on the exponential audio algorithms, which I've always liked anyway for things like percussion. And I had been using the R2, and then I thought, I'm going to try this one because it allows you to move more freely between different kinds of reverbs. So this is kind of like a plate, pretty much a pure plate sound over at this point here. Okay, so that's the reverb. And again, it sounds like there's a fair amount on there, but in context, and again, it sounds quite a long reverb. On a percussion, I often use a shorter reverb, but in this context, it sounded right, making it that little bit longer. So let's now just, again, have a listen, now that we've done the whole thing, to everything before and afterwards. So we're going to start with no effects, and then we'll bring in the effects. So you can hear rhythmically, there's no comparison really between the two. But of course you could change the balance on that a lot if you wanted to. So I'm just going to mess around with the balance a little just so you can hear what it's like. So here we go with that. So I hope that was useful, and if it was, please do give the video a like and ring the bell and subscribe, and hope to see you next time.